this is the kit I'm going to be building. It's, in my opinion, it's one of the best high-grade gunplay you can build. I've actually built a couple of these, and I've enjoyed every one, and I thought I just need to build another one. So this will be what I'm working on this morning, and I'm just going to be getting the parts off of the sprues and getting the nubs cleaned up. So please feel free to join me and ask any questions in the chat, or give me your thoughts if you've built this or built another one. And I'll just spend a little time here testing out the live streaming. My first time doing this, as you can probably tell. So anyway, let me get to this. All right, as always, it starts with the instructions. And if you've never built a Bandai kit before, they're fairly organized in the way they break things down. You start off with, in this particular kit, you start off with your body section, and then your head, right arm, on through to the left arm, right leg, and so forth. Sometimes what they'll do for some kits, like if the portions of the left and the right arm are the same, they may show you those instructions in one sequence, and they'll just put an indication that you should do this 2 times, so that you'll know that you know you're to make 2 sets of those. And then if there's a distinction between left and right, then it will further break those down. So be aware of those. Another thing to be aware of, if you've never built a Gundam kit before, are just the various symbols that they use, which help you identify what you're supposed to do at which point in the build. Most of them are fairly obvious. Newer kits will have the listing of what it is in English, so that you know you'll know what it is. Older ones may have it in Japanese only. In those cases, it's fairly easy to get on the internet and find those translations, or you can use the Google Translate app, which while sometimes it does give some hilarious translations, it may prove useful in eventually helping you understand what's going on with the parts. A couple of other things: if you've never built Gundam kits before, they generally come with these poly caps, which allow for various movement and articulation. Some newer ones don't have them, but that's what these are. You need to be careful with these when you're cutting them off the runners, because if you slice them open, they won't have any tension on them when you put in joints and things like that, and that may cause problems. So just be careful. But they're sturdy enough. As long as you just cut between the joint and the attachment point, you'll be good to go. There's no real worries with those. Another thing that, if you've never built one of these kits before, that I've always found interesting, is they have these multicolored sprues, which really, first time I saw this, it kind of tripped me out. I was like, never seen anything like that before. And to be honest, I'm not sure how they do these. I don't know. They have little connector points, but I can't imagine that they would cast them and then snap them together. So I'm guessing there's some kind of Bandai magic that happens to do this all at one time. So, but you've got these multicolored sprues. This kit also has the armor parts, which are in just a slightly greenish white color. just a hint of green to it. And you've got all of your armor parts there. And then you have your various internal frame parts, your weapons, all of those cast in this kind of dark gray. Now, for painting these, and this I'm getting way ahead in the process, but for painting these, I'm actually going to be using Mr. Color Gundam color paints, and it just happens to be that they have matching colors for every one of these sprues, or every one of these colors rather. So that's really cool. Although when I'm painting them, it's often hard to see where you've painted and where you haven't, because the paint has a little bit of a gloss to it. So you have to look really careful to understand, or to see where you've painted the parts versus what's bare plastic. Beg your pardon there. I had to mute for a moment while I coughed. I've got a little bit of a cold, and so it's going to be somewhat of an adventure to do live streaming with the cold, but I'll charge ahead anyway. So let me check my computer here for a moment and see what I can see. All right. Well, everything seems to be working. Like I said in the beginning, I've not done a live stream before, so this is as much experiment in live streaming as it is actually getting some work done and just filming it along the way. All right, so I'm going to start getting these parts. Again, if you've never built one, they put a punch out number here on each sprue. This is the A runner. And then of course there are various numbers associated with the parts. So, you know, when they designate A6, that comes from this one. If it's PC something, that's from the polycaps. C is of course going to be from the C runner, and so forth. So just keep that in mind. Now the way I like to work is to use two sets of sprue cutters. I have these, what I call just all-purpose ones. These are by God Hand. They are the CN125 God Hand nippers, and they're fairly sharp. There've been plenty of models that this was all I used for building, so they're very sharp. And then for more fine cuts, I've got these Tamiya cutters. I'm not sure which number they are. It has MH19M on it, so if that means anything, then hopefully that'll be helpful. But what I'll do is just start getting part A6, which is this right here. And what I want to do, let me do it this way so it can be seen a little easier. I'm going to make the cut so that there's still a little bit of the nub left on the part. Now usually I do it faster than this, but trying to, one, demonstrate it, and two, do it from this distance. Usually I'm right up on it because of my poor vision. But I made those cuts, and I don't know if you can see there, but there's just the tiniest little nub left from each cut. What I'll do then is I'll go in with my sharper cutters, and I'll get right up on it, make sure they're parallel to the part, and then I'll just make a little cut like that. Now, quite often, if you're going to be painting these, the cut, depending on the nippers you use, if you use some sharper ones like the high-end God Hand nippers or something like that, that may be sharp enough, or maybe a clean enough cut so that if you're going to paint it, that's all you need to do. Now, if you're building this without painting, you're probably, or if there's a little bit of a mark left there, you're probably going to want to go a little further. Now, these Tamiya cutters, they're good. They're not God hand cutters. So there's just a little bit of a nub there, and there's several ways of dealing with that. One is to just take your hobby knife and just carefully trim away at the excess like that. You don't want to do too much, but just enough, holding it parallel to the surface so that when it encounters that rough area, it'll come right off. And you can get that looking pretty clean. It won't stress it. And a simple way to see if you've cleaned up the nub good enough is just rub your thumbnail along it like that. For some reason, you can rub your finger and you may not feel something, but when you rub your thumbnail or any fingernail across it, it seems to be much more sensitive to what's there. In fact, speaking of using your thumbnail, what I found is sometimes if there's only a little bit of a nub left, you can actually clean it with your thumbnail in some cases. This one's needs a little more work, but sometimes the thumbnail itself is enough to clean it. Now, if you're not going to be painting your model, it's really critical that you make sure to do this two-cut method so that you minimize the stress marks. There's just the slightest bit of stress mark there. You can try sanding down a little bit, and if it's only right along the surface, you may get back to the blue plastic and it will look pretty good. However, if the stress mark has gone much further below the surface, you may have to sand back a little bit. That can cause some problems. So if you're not painting, be very aware of that, especially on these darker colors. On the light colors, white and things like that, it's not really an issue because obviously the stress marks are the same color. So that's not a concern with those. Now you may be saying, why are you cutting towards yourself? Well, it gives me better control. You'll notice that I'm not doing it like this. I've got my thumb resting against it right there, and I'm only making little micro movements, and I'm actually pushing against this part of the hobby knife harder than I'm pushing to make the cut, so that it's really in control. And it's generally safe to do when you have small nubs. If you have a larger nub, you need to grab these out and cut it down as far as you can, because if you're trying to cut through something larger, when it breaks loose, you never know when that's going to just pop right off, and you won't be able to control it, and it'll cut yourself. So you can cut away, which is probably the safer method, but I've just never found that I have as much control doing that as I do this very tight method of coordinating my fingers to make that cut. Sometimes I even don't necessarily push just the knife. I kind of come from both directions. I'm pushing the knife and pushing the part, so that'll work. Pardon me for just a moment. I need to cough, so let me mute this. Okay, sorry about that. Like I said, I've got a little bit of a cold, and it's probably not the best time to be doing a live stream. But here in the United States, it is the day after Thanksgiving, which is known as Black Friday. And so my wife and my daughter are out shopping for the morning, and I figured that would give me a good opportunity to get some live streaming done. And I'll actually, once I'm finished with this live streaming, I'll actually put this video up onto my YouTube channel for free public viewing. This is not going to be a Patreon exclusive. This will be for free public viewing. It's actually going to be the first part of a series I want to do specifically about building Gundam, Gunpla, and it's going to be targeted at someone who, the initial videos are going to be targeted at someone who's not done Gunpla work before, to kind of, you know, take some of the mystery out of it and give some strategy on building. Then once I get further into the process, it'll be for a general audience, because I'm going to take this from sitting here and nipping and denubbing the parts all the way through assembly, painting, weathering, the whole 9 yards. The produced videos, I'm not going to do them all live. The produced videos are going to be shorter. Plan for those to be 10 to 15 minutes. But this one, I'm just going to ramble on for a while and build as I go. Now, to put these two parts in here, I'm just doing this first section. It's very important that you pay attention to the alignment. In most cases, Bandai makes it so that it's impossible to get them wrong. But sometimes there are cases where you can put something in wrong. So pay attention to the alignment. Now, if you're going to be building this just to snap it up, you're not going to be painting it. You may do other steps afterwards, but if you're not going to be painting the parts separately, you can go ahead and snap this part in there. However, I want to later come back and disassemble it so that I can paint it easier. Now, if you ask the question, well, why would you assemble it only to then disassemble it to paint it? Assembling a Gunpla ahead of time allows you to see where the seam lines are going to be and gives you a chance to decide how you want to deal with them. That's something that I'll cover in a later video. But for now, just know it's kind of I guess you would say, if you've ever done traditional model building, this is what you call test fitting. It's just test fitting the entire kit because it's snap fit. You can do that. But anyway, to make it easy to pull the sections apart when I'm ready to paint it, what I do, you've got these little pegs here that fit into these little holes inside there. Bandai's engineering is really, really good, and the tolerances are really, really tight. You put this in there, and it's going to it's pretty much going to stay. Sometimes it's just about impossible to get those parts separated without breaking them. But a simple trick is to cut off the peg at about a 45-degree angle, just like that. And the way I line it up is I try to get, let me just demonstrate it this way because it's so small. Let's say this is the peg. This is the top of the peg. This is the bottom of the peg. I try to use my nippers like that so that the outside edge of the nippers lines up with the bottom of the peg. And then there's about a 45-degree angle. So the cut is about like that, if that makes sense. I know this is a crazy way to demonstrate it, but what that does is it shortens the amount of distance that the peg goes into the hole, and it thus reduces the tension that holds everything in there. Now, this will still be sufficient. I mean, you can build it and not glue it, and this will generally hold together unless you're moving it around a lot. But I'm able to now put that in there, and then later on when I want to remove it, I can just pop it right back out and disassemble it easy. But it's enough to hold it in there. So that's something that to keep in mind when you're building these, and you want to make sure that you can disassemble it for later work. All right, I need PC2. So let me clip those off. And if you're watching this, I would love to hear from you in the chat on YouTube. So drop me a comment if you want to. Let me know what you're working on, or if you got any questions, or just to say, hey, doofus, I'm watching you. I'd appreciate it. All right. I line these up, and sometimes it's helpful to just hold it right up to the instructions and make sure that they're lined up. And I'm going to put that in there like that, and this one in here like that. Now the poly caps, those can pull apart fairly easy, so there's no need to nip any of these when you're assembling them. You may do more harm than good if you're nipping poly caps. So leave those as is. Now I've got to do this part, and I'm going to pull out the C sprues, C35. I think this is part of the kit's neck. Or no, this snaps into the waist. Now some of these parts that are internal, where they'll never see the light of day, I don't get too fussy about actually cleaning those up too much. I may use the knife to clean them up just to make sure everything fits well, but I don't get too hung up on getting those perfect. And I need PC4. So let me grab this. Do not lose the poly caps. That can be frustrating. And when you finish a build, if there are poly caps left over, which happen from time to time, save them. After a while, if you've built enough Gunpla and you lose a poly cap, chances are you'll be able to find the exact same poly cap in another set. Now, one thing to note, when you're putting on the poly caps, is that, hang on a second, let me check something on my computer here. Sorry to disappear like that. You want to check the alignment. This one shows the kind of a flat edge right here on one side, and that goes towards the part. So make sure when you're putting that in that you align it accordingly. And then this is going to go in here, and again, checking the alignment. There's a little tab on the top, and they show the tab should be up. So I'm going to stick that in right there. And we'll be good to go for that. Now what it wants me to do is grab part A8. And that's going to be here on our colored sprue. This is going to be this nice red color. Again, like I said, I will be painting these, but I'm going to be painting it the exact color that the parts are. And I'll explain that in a later video. But basically, I do that so that it gives me the ability to just control the look of the paint. If I want to do pre-shading, then I can put that underneath it. That gives a certain look. It protects the plastic from any weathering products you may use. Bandai plastic is fairly susceptible to hotter thinners, especially odorless enamel type thinners like you would use with oils and enamels and things like that. And while I could put some on the surface here and just let it sit, as it evaporated, it wouldn't harm the plastic at all. But if I let some get into one of these joints and it doesn't evaporate, it can eat away the plastic very quickly. I had I don't remember the kit. It was one of the Iron Blooded Orphans 1/100 scale kits, but it had a part that had a joint, that moved like that. And I had forgotten to prime inside of that, and I was mucking it up with some thinners. And a little bit of the thinner got inside of it, and I didn't realize it. And I went to move it like that so I could get to other parts of it. And as soon as I moved it, the joint here, not the peg end, but the whole end, broke into 4 pieces. It didn't melt. It stressed the plastic enough that it broke. I was able to glue it back together. It still worked, although I ended up gluing it just to make sure that it stayed stable. But it's enough of an issue that you have to pay attention to it, or it can bite you. All right, now let me see. It's showing me to put this part here, and it looks like that just slides in. One of the rules of thumb when you're building a gunpla, if something doesn't fit, it's you, not Bandai. Okay, I see how it works now. There's these little tabs right there that line up with that. Sometimes, even though the instructions say it goes right there, they even highlight it. My vision is not great, so sometimes I'd look at it and I'm not real sure what it is I'm supposed to be doing, so I have to play with it a little bit. All right, let me get the back part of this. Hey, good morning, Wayne. You're catching my live stream, huh? I just saw you post that in there. Thanks for watching this, buddy. I appreciate it. All right, let me clean up this part. Wayne is an acquaintance of mine that I know in a very random sort of casual way. That's a joke for him. Seriously though, I'm glad you're watching. All right, let me clean this up. Another thing to note about cleaning up these parts is one of the great things about doing, I guess you'd say, a full-size test fit is when you're disassembling, but before you paint, if you noticed you missed any nubs, you have a chance to do it again. Sometimes I use the knife blade at a 45-degree angle and just kind of plane it down like that. That works especially well if you're going to be painting. Did I wash my hands? I did sometime. There's some blue paint right there. I guess it's lacquer paint, and it didn't come off when I washed them, but I tried to. Okay, I'm going to join these 2 parts together, and there's 2 pegs. Let me pull this out to show. There's 2 pegs here. This is your standard kind of peg, your just solid peg right there. You've got this one that's hollow. For these pegs right here, I pulled that red part off, and being careful not to nip the poly cap, I'll just clip that peg right there. But what I do when I have one that's like this circle here that's hollow like that, if I try to clip that, sometimes it can deform it, and it'll go oblong on you, which isn't good. So what you can do in cases like that, if it's either this type of peg or you're having trouble getting to the peg, you just go to the other side where it's going to connect into, and I just take my nippers and I stick it into the hole on the other side just a little bit. You don't have to go all the way in, maybe just 1/8 of an inch. I'm not sure what that is in metric system, maybe 5 milliliters or something like that. But certainly, I don't know the metric system, certainly not more than a couple of millimeters. But by making a cut there, it reduces the tension that's on that peg. And so I can now go in, making sure I've got it aligned the right way. I can now go in and put that together. But later on, when I want to come back and pull it apart, I can just kind of work it out like that. Now, when you pull it apart, the poly caps may come off on one side or the other, but that's fine. That's, they don't have enough tension to hold it in there. But I've got this torso unit built, and if I were building this, and did not plan on painting it, that's actually substantial enough that it will stay together unless you do some really severe moving around with it. But when you want to repaint it, everything comes back apart, uh, and makes things really easy to get to. So next is the waist, and I'll get that. Another red part. I really like how colorful these Gunpla are. Having built aircraft for many years, which I enjoyed. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like I didn't have any fun with it. I had a lot of fun at the time when I was enjoying it. But they were all generally, because I built military aircraft, they were all generally very drab, neutral grays and olive drabs, and grays and greens, and desaturated blues. And when you had red, it was usually just some kind of unit identification, or maybe a mark on the some nose art or something like that. So it wasn't always real colorful. So, but one of the things I do like I said, about these Gunpla is they're more colorful. Now, this one, I'm not going to clip this peg, and I'm not going to clip inside of here, because that will come apart without too much problem. So that, because I'm going to leave this to where it can move, and I want that to have some movement. And if I clip that, it's going to be too loose to be able to move. So because that can come apart fairly easily with just some twisting like that, it takes a little force. But I've built a couple of these before, and saw that, well, now it's going to make a liar of me. But you can do that. Now, I could, if I really wanted to, I could go in here and sand this down some. It's just hard to get to that. So I'll put it in there. You can, another thing you can do is just not push it all the way in, which makes it really easy to pull out. So there's a lot of ways of doing that. And the goal with test building, or doing this type of build for painting, is not so much to make it look fully complete, but to see where the seam lines are that you're going to have to deal with. Like, here's a couple along the shoulders up here, and because of I'll paint the interior parts, then I'll paint the exterior, and if I wanted to completely get rid of that seam line, I would have to put it together, mask everything off, glue it together, sand it down, repaint it, which can be a little bit of a pain. So I'll actually just convert that into a panel line, and in a later video I'll show how to do that. But keep moving. All right. Something else to note here. Bandai will give you the order that things go in. There's a little diamond here that says 1, and then this one says 2. So it's saying take part A14, put it in first, and then part PC1 and put it in second. Now, in this case, you could probably get away with reversing that order, because the neck part will fit in there fine without it being in a particular order. But there are some sections and pieces that if you don't do it in the right order, it absolutely won't work. I remember one time I was building, I've lost track of which kit it was, but it had you put in some kind of socket for the shoulder first and then close everything up. And I just looked at the parts, and I grabbed the main thing and closed it up first, and then I was looking at it going, how do I put that in there? And turned out that I had to disassemble everything to make it work. So pay attention to that. Now, if you come up with a better build sequence, do it. But I generally go by what Bandai says. So this one, another little note here, there's a little symbol that looks like two rabbit ears that'll sometimes be next to a part. And what that's indicating is you need to pay attention to some feature of this part and have it pointed this way. In this case, it's showing that there's kind of an inset line that needs to be forward. The back is hollow, so it's, you know, it's saying make sure that this side is forward before you put it in there. But I'll go ahead and put that on there because I'm going to follow their build sequence, and then put this in there, making sure it's aligned the right way. And we've got that. All right, now to the backpack, part C24. I like these backpacks on them. I don't know why. Maybe the old Army guy in me remembers carrying backpacks around and thinks that it's kind of cool to have a backpack. Although I don't carry them around anymore, that's for sure. I think one of the reasons my back hurts a good bit of the time is because I did that for so many years. But nobody twisted my arm and made me do it. I wanted to. Anyway, all right, let me clean up these nubs here and do a little scraping there. Another thing, you can of course use sanding sticks like these to sand down parts. I recommend you do wet sanding, and if you're not sure what wet sanding is, you take this and you dip it in some water. I usually dip it about that deep and then sand away. When it's wet like that, one, it keeps the dust from going everywhere, but it does a better job of sanding things smooth. It doesn't tend to leave the deep gouges that you often see in the surface of it. Wet sanding even works with files like this. So sometimes I'll just take a file like that and I'm putting no pressure at all on it, but I'll just go back and forth like that, and every now and then clean up the water, and I'll just check it with my thumbnail. If it's good, I'll move on to the next one. Now you can come in later with, you know, something like this 600 grit and clean it up, and it'll be even smoother. But once I put paint on this, it'll work just fine. Now here's another one. Here's one, I guess you'd call this maybe a special case. You don't want to clip these because, you know, eventually you want the backpack to be on there solidly. But at the same time, you don't want to nip these because they may deform. And like I said, you can't really clip these. So what I simply do, because this is going to fit. I mean, I don't need to test this. I don't need to know what it looks like. Some of these parts like this, I just leave off. I don't even worry about it. So, you know, you can certainly do what you want. If you do push this all the way on, it's not too difficult to get apart. If you want to see what it looks like with it on, but you know, you're worried about getting it apart, just don't put it on all the way. I mean, you see, I can get it that close and with just very little effort pull this apart like that. So next I'm going to get the little thruster bells that go into the bottom of this, and this is so that our Gundam can fly. Well, not the model, but in the anime, the model only flies if I get upset with it. One of the great things I like about building Bandai Gunpla kits and just Bandai kits in general is they're not really frustrating. I like how simple they are to build. They're not they're not a problem. You know, I could mention other brands from my aircraft days that I won't, but if I did, they would rhyme with Special Hobby. Uh, that, I mean, you wondered if they made the sprues all in one factory. And I mean, seriously, just some aircraft kits, not just that brand, but there have been a few that I've built that, I mean, I just seriously wondered, did anybody at the factory actually build the kit before they released it? Um, because some of the parts were just so poor fitting and so poorly engineered and so poorly cast. But Bandai, they've got their game on. And if you're thinking, you know, as I did for a few years until I started doing some research, if you're thinking Bandai is just a little company that does kits for toys, they are the second most powerful brand in terms of brand valuation in the world. They're only behind Lego. They're ahead of Hasbro. They're ahead of Mattel. They're even ahead of My Pretty Pony. So that'll that'll tell you something there. But they've sold, I think the number, if I remember right, is 12.5 million Gunpla per year for the last 40 years. And if that's not serious numbers, I don't know what is. So they're not a little company, and they have plenty of opportunity to get their engineering down pat, and they've done so. It's hard. It's been hard for me after I've built a number of these Bandai kits, both the Gunpla and Star Wars kits, which I also highly recommend. They're a lot of fun. It's really hard to build other kits because you know people may say, well, why don't you just apply your modeling skills? Yeah, but that's like saying, well, I got this really cool looking car, but I have to go out and mess with the engine every day before I start it up. um, Nobody wants that. So what does the meme say? Ain't nobody got time for that. um, so what I do, or what I think about these Bandai kits is, I mean, they they bypass all of that. They just make it so that if you want to build it very serious, and detail it and weather it, you can do that, and there's no frustration in the assembly. If you give it to your 10-year-old niece or nephew, um, then they go together very well too. The other day, a friend of mine who has a daughter who I think she's 4 or 5. Um, she's gotten interested in modeling because he builds models, and he had asked me about, um, could I recommend a kit for him to build with her, a Gunpla kit. And I recommended this very kit because, I mean, aside from helping a kid with the nippers, um, there's nothing about this that they can't do. It's a very very simple thing. So and it teaches them to read instructions and to use logic and to use their hands. I mean, there's a lot of good things that come with it. So um, it's a good process. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're doing this is any model kit, but specific to Gunpla, sometimes there will be mold seams where the part is molded together. You see how it's shaped like this. Well, it goes, of course, into a mold that has a top and a bottom half, and where those two halves meet, there may be a little bit of a line. Now, Bandai does a pretty good job of mitigating most of those, but sometimes there will be a little bit of a seam line, and there's no way you're going to see it along this beam saber handle. It's not a lightsaber; it's a beam saber. Um, there's a little bit of a mold line there, and all I do for those is I take the back of my knife and just plane them down. I mean, you can go back over them with sandpaper if you want, or with a sanding stick or something, but usually just planing them down with the back of the knife works fine, because you know, if you're just building this for fun, you're snapping it up and you're just you know, whiling the time away, you may not want to worry about it. If you're painting it and you're going to be weathering it, um, you may want to do that, because those will definitely show up when you start putting washes and things like that. I'll go back later and clean those up when I can get up close to it with my Optivisor. But these are going to go right here. And I was just checking my mic. I just had this horrible thought. What if I've been muted the whole time? Wouldn't that be hysterical? Those go right there. And those are set up so that he can reach back over his shoulder, I guess, and grab the beam saber anytime he needs to, you know, beam saber people. But it's not a lightsaber. so don't get confused about that. All right, that's the torso done. Well, I'm coming up on close to an hour that I've been sitting here rambling and going on and on about Gunpla. So I think I'm gonna call this a wrap. And now that I've accomplished my main goal was not so much to get this built, although I do want to get this built. My main goal was not so much to get this built, but to just test out live streaming, and I've been able to do that. And to the 1 or 2 people who have watched it, I appreciate you hanging in there and keeping your eye on what I'm doing. I will put this up later on my YouTube channel, so that people can come back and watch it later and listen to all this ramble for a while. But if you haven't checked out my work, I have a presence on Facebook at John Bias Scale. I don't know if I listed as johnbias.com scale models, John Bias Scale Models. Just look up John Bias Scale Models and you'll find me. My website is at johnbias.com, and I have Instagram and Twitter, and I also have a Patreon that if you would like to support the work that I do, there's some options on there. All of that, once I put this up for archive in my YouTube channel, all of those links will be there if they're not already there now. So you can find out about that there. But thank you so much for supporting my work and my channel and keeping up with what I do, and for your encouragement and you know, passing along emails and messages and everything like that. I always like hearing from people. I'll continue working on this, but I think that will do it for this live stream. So happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.